Okay, awesome. So good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Shaw with the Greater Binghamton Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our third in the series for Inside the C-Suite. This morning, we're focusing on habit 3. And Mary, which is put first things first. And before I turn it over to our facilitator, Mary Surdy, I'd like to do a brief introduction of our two CEOs joining us this morning. Peter Newman is the Regional President of M&T Bank, and John Carrig is the President and CEO of UHS and Inc. and UHS Hospitals. So welcome, Peter and John.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. So if you guys could just each give, your own brief introduction, a little bit about your background, and what led you to where you are today, kind of like a brief synopsis of your career path, I guess. Let's start with John.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here and to be a co-presenter with Peter, who I've known for a long time here in the Binghamton area. I grew up in the Finger Lakes and Southern Tier regions of upstate New York. I'm a graduate of Ithaca High School, St. Andrews College in North Carolina, and the School of Management at Binghamton University, where I got my MBA back in 1983. After I finished that program, I joined UHS in 1983, so I'm going on my 38th year at UHS. Started in human resources and worked in operations, and for 15 years or so, I was the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. And then back on the 1st of January, 2018, I became the CEO of the UHS system. So I've had a lot of different jobs in UHS over the years and watched us grow and been part of our growth, where we now are a billion-dollar company and with over 6,500 employees.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, awesome. Now, Peter.
Yeah, so fun fact, John and I actually got to know each other through the Chamber of Commerce. We were both, I think it was the class of 1993,
That's right.
what then was called Leadership Broom, the Broom Leadership Institute.
Right.
And it's been a great friendship since then, and I've learned a lot from John, so it's a pleasure to be on with him this morning. I came to this community in 1990. I got into banking in 1989 when I graduated from college. I'm originally from downstate. One of the tiny little community outside of New York City called Pleasantville. And it's very similar to the town that the movie was made about, but it was not that town. And I did not want to work in New York City, so consciously decided I wanted to go into banking without being in a major city. So I moved to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And it was wonderful down there. I love the bank I worked for. But I had fallen in love 6 months before moving to North Carolina with my college sweetheart. And she's from this area and was an engineer with GE. So I moved to Broome County in 1990 to start with Endicott Trust, a tiny little bank that 2 years later was bought by M&T, which was tiny by today's standards. So my bank today is a $150 billion bank, the 16th largest bank in the country. And at the time they bought Endicott Trust, we were 8 billion. So it's been a rapid rise over the past 30 years that I've been with the bank. So again, I joined in 1990. This summer will be 31 years. Always in commercial banking when I was in North Carolina, and then when I came here, very customer focused, and that's what I like. I like interacting with customers, and I've been in my role for the past 11 years.
Great, thank you. I actually did not know that you were in the same leadership class together.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And that was early in the program because the first graduating class was in 1988. So
yeah, very early.
Far into it. And yeah, and that program is, running strong after 30 plus years. Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm going to introduce our facilitator, Mary Surdy, and turn the program over to her. I just want to reiterate this. We would love this to be an interactive program. We will be monitoring the chat. Mary does have questions for our CEOs, but if if you have any of your own, please put them in the chat and we will integrate them into today's program. So Mary M. Surdy is a dedicated award-winning leadership consultant with 40 plus years of experience in administrative, educational, and business expertise. She specializes in human capitalization, strategic planning, staff development, teaching and learning, and personnel and project management. Mary has served in administration in multiple school districts and as a mentor, coach, teacher at all levels K through 12 and college instructor. Locally, Ms. Surdy serves on several nonprofit boards and is an active member of Binghamton Rotary. Nationally, Ms. Surdy's been a consultant and trainer for Franklin Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People since 2002. Mary is also a graduate of the Chamber's leadership program, BLI. So without further ado, good morning, Mary.
Good morning. Thank you, Amy. Welcome to Peter and John and all of our virtual participants. We're excited to be offering the third of this 7-part series, and our conversations with our CEOs this morning will really talk about the impact that Stephen Covey's work has had on their teams, their organizations, as well as their personal lives. I'm going to provide a brief overview of habit number 3, put first things first, and then we're going to engage with Peter and John and our audience to share their wisdom and experiences. For those of you who are new to our series, we're centering around the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And if you want to just flip up the first slide, Amy, it was written in 1989, and it continues to be one of the 25 most influential business management books ever written. Covey's premise is that character and principles are crucial to effective living and to great leadership. So in habit number 1 and habit number 2 on our next slide, Covey argues that highly effective people are proactive. And highly effective people take responsibility, they act on principles, all those P words of habit 1. In habit 2, they begin with the end in mind, that they articulate what a purposeful life and legacy is. So my first question to Peter and to John this morning, before we move into habit 3, could you give us a couple of principles, values, those timeless, enduring truths that you live your life by personally and professionally? And then second part of that is, what legacy do you want to leave in your organization, in our greater Binghamton community? Let's go with Peter. Do you want to take a crack at that one?
Sure, Mary, thanks. There's good overlap for my company and my personal life. And I think of these values and principles sort of as the why statement and the how statement, why we do it and how we get things done. Values being the why, and the participants heard early on, I probably have some good overlaps from Kevin Blake, a person I certainly admire. Family is incredibly important. And, when you break that down, sort of what's important, why is family so important, and why do I do all that I do? We want to educate our children. We want to share family time. So for us, things that are incredibly important to us, our whys are, education and vacation, having fun and playing. So I'm constantly telling my folks at work, PTO is really important. I am certainly not a leader that wants my folks working 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Take that time off and enjoy. And I think you're a better participant in that manner. Some of the principles, I think serving. I believe in serving leadership. I believe in being yourself. Humility, which I think also overlaps well with Kevin. He's spiritual and sort of faith-based, and I think that humility and believing in a greater being, God, is something that centers me, and I think that's an important principle in my life. And the principles for the bank, our why is to make a difference in the lives of others, our community and our customers. And we do so, our how are through 5 things: integrity, ownership, collaboration, candor, and curiosity. And I love those. I like the last 2 particularly. I think candor overlaps with being yourself. You've got to be sincere and let people know who you really are and talk frankly. I think that's incredibly important, personally and professionally. And curiosity overlaps really well with that education. It's constant. You got to be a lifelong learner and be curious. In every day you can learn something, and every day I think I do learn something, professionally and personally. So those are my things. I'll jump into the legacy a little bit. It's really just I want to emphasize that I make a difference in the lives of others. Personally, that's important to me, to be impactful to the people I meet. I want to make a difference in the people that I interact with, and I want to make this community, which is already, I think, incredibly collaborative. I want to be a change agent and make sure that I continue to emphasize some of the awesome parts of our community and really bring out the best in other people.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. John, how about you? What principles, do you live your life by, both personally and professionally?
Thanks, Mary. Great comments from Peter, by the way. It's off to a good start, for sure. I think about principles that drive me and drive my organization of compassion and service and integrity. So it's very similar to what Peter is talking about. Compassion is really what healthcare should be about. And I think we're trying to make healthcare in our community and at UHS really rooted in compassion. It's one of our values. Peter talked about, the why and the how. Our 5 values are compassion, trust, respect, teamwork, and innovation. So those words and those concepts drive what we do every single day. So my leadership really is rooted in trust and respect for our mission, our values, the people we serve, the people we work with, and for the communities that we serve. And there's a long mission statement that we developed at UHS. And when I talk to our new employees, I pick out 2 words. And those 2 words are "we serve." That's what we're here for. That is the essence of our mission. And I think that carries over nicely to my personal life. Certainly, service in the community, taught my kids about service and giving back and those types of things, and they've continued those traditions in the communities where they live. From a legacy perspective, and I think it's very fitting to talk about this because the chamber, for example, Amy always talks about how do we attract people and businesses, right? And we do that by promoting ourselves and our community to our businesses and individuals. And we often cite quality of life and safety of our neighborhoods and cultural opportunities and the quality of education, but also the quality of healthcare. And from a legacy perspective, what we want to do at UHS for the greater Binghamton area and the Southern Tier is create and sustain world-class healthcare. And that's what the legacy we think is so important.
Wonderful. I could hear through both of you common strands, and certainly your service to the community comes through loud and clear, not only by what you're saying this morning, but by what both of you and your organizations do. So thank you. I'm going to transition to habit 3, and habit 3 this morning is put first things first. Where do our first things come from? Our first things come from that habit 1 and habit 2 that I reviewed. It's about our principles in habit 1 and our purposeful life, our mission statement of habit 2. So our first things help us balance important relationships, roles, activities in order to fulfill our mission. First things are that compass. They move us in the right direction daily and weekly. They help us achieve those principles centered and expressed in our mission statement. So let me give you an example. This next slide is about Kevin Blake, and John and Peter have both mentioned it this morning. Kevin is the CEO of ICS, and he's given me permission to share his personal mission statement. So Kevin says, I exist to use the talents and skills God granted to me to lead and be a change agent, helping people reach their full potential in all areas of life. And Kevin has explicitly identified 4 principles or values that his mission statement is founded on: family, faith, integrity, and legacy. So if I said to Kevin, Kevin, what are your first things? Kevin would reflect on his mission statement and think about habit 1 being proactive, and he would say, one of my first things is family. So he would say that spending quality time is a priority, is a first thing for him. That it's important for him to have dinner with his wife and his children most evenings, and he makes sure that that's part of his schedule. So habit 3 really is about how we manage and prioritize our time instead of constantly reacting to urgencies or emergencies. So my question to Peter and John, can you give us 3 or 4 things that you put first in your professional or your personal life? Let's start with John.
Thanks, Mary. We have a concept at UHS that we try and live every single day, and that concept is family first. As I said, we've got over 6,500 employees and hundreds of other members of our medical staff, and we have lives and we have issues and we have obligations outside of work, if you will. So when someone has something they need to do and it involves family, and they might have to miss a part of a day of work or part of a week or something, whether it be an illness or a school event or whatever it may be, we try and practice family first, because we think of our colleagues as family. Now it's a big family, and Peter's family is even bigger in M&T, right, across the region and across the Northeast. But I think that's one of the things that we try and do every single day. And it does start with me. I have to practice that, not just preach it. One of the other principles, for our business is patient-centeredness. Everything we do should revolve around the patient, not revolve around us. Our patients come to us, as all of you know, needy, scared, vulnerable. Their life or health is threatened in some way, or the life or health is threatened, of a loved one. And goes back to that element of compassion I talked about earlier. So patient-centeredness, really, really important. And then I think something that carries over to professional and personal is that, and Peter mentioned education, and it's right where I am as well. We believe that education is transformative. It is such a uplifting opportunity for so many. I know we've got a lot of young people on the Zoom today. We believe that education can make a huge difference in people's lives. And when we think about what we do at UHS from an education perspective, we have residency training programs in family medicine and internal medicine and geriatrics and podiatry and GI and cardiology. And we literally have hundreds of physicians practicing in the Southern Tier, in the 8 counties of the Southern Tier, because they trained here at UHS over many, many years. Our family medicine program was one of the first sponsored programs in the country. So those things that we keep in mind first are really incredibly important.
Great. Thank you, John. So I heard John talk about his first things. I heard him talk about being patient-centered. He talked about family first, and he talked about education. Let's switch over here to Peter. Peter, what could you add to that?
Sure, Mary, happy to. And again, good overlap. I love that UHS is focused on family, and that's that's a common theme in our community. I'm not sure that's common everywhere. The companies that, and I come in contact with lots of companies in our area. Most of the company owners I know are focused on the realization that if you take care of your employees, they're going to take care of your customers. And in my organization, we focus on that. We've got 3 priorities: employees, customers, and shareholders. And it's in that order. If you take care of your employees are going to care for your customers. And if those 2 things happen, your shareholders are going to be incredibly happy. And I just believe it's organic. You need to take care of your employees. And in taking care of your employees, you need to realize that most people, when you ask them what their priority is or what their why, very few people are going to say, my why is working. I love my job. I love my company, but it's not why I get up in the morning. I work for other reasons. I work for my family. I work to be able to provide that education and those fun vacations. And that's true for everybody, right? So as owners of businesses or as leaders, you need to recognize that. Take care of your employees. They're going to take care of your customers. John's business, his customers are his patients. And in my business, our customers are our borrowers and our depositors. And we have to be focused on them every day of the week. And that's got to be the center. All of our decisions need to be focused on whether or not we're taking good care of our customers. And so, that's professionally. Personally, I already shared sort of the things that I'm centered on. It's family. It's little bits of being able to spend time together in a very focused manner, and making sure that we always prioritize family time. So my kids are all grown now. My youngest is graduating from college in 2 weeks. But still getting the whole family together for a vacation is an incredible priority. And last year, it was sort of our first break from the pandemic, as there were 7 of us went away with some girlfriends and now a daughter-in-law for a week. And to be able to sort of quarantine together and share experiences in July of what we had been through over the 3-4 months before, and still not knowing what the future months held, was incredibly important and a highlight of the year for me.
Mhm.
And a good test.
A good test is right.
Good test.
Actually, I'd like to interrupt with a question. So Catherine, if you'd like to unmute yourself, I would love to have you ask the question directly.
Sure. Thank you, Amy. To both Peter and John, thank you so much for being here. Love everything you've said so far. How has the pandemic changed how you lead and the actions you take? Because I can't think of 2 more important things that people have been focused on: financial constraints, needs, stresses, and medical. And you both look so calm, which is probably why you got to where you are. Or maybe you're not drinking coffee this morning, I don't know. But I would love to hear how your leadership or the actions you take have changed during this time.
John, you got to go first, because you're clearly the calmer leader, and you've done a great job leading our community through this, because you were certainly at the top of that.
Thanks, Peter. And thanks for the question. Very, very insightful question, because things have changed. But I also think that, by the way, the financial challenges have been severe. We are digging our way out of it. I think every business has been impacted, every restaurant, every small business, every bank. But having a partnership like UHS has with M&T, by the way, has been very helpful for us in multiple ways. And Peter and his team have been fabulous to work with. And we have other banks we work with as well, but particularly M&T. I think the pandemic has dramatically reminded us the importance of those values I spoke about earlier. Mm-hmm. Has dramatically reminded us how critical our staff are to what we try and accomplish. And we've seen both, this dichotomy in this public health crisis, where many patients have stayed away because of fear of going out and coming to hospital or going to a clinic. And yet we've had to take care of very sick patients who have been COVID positive. At one point, we had over 100 in our 4 hospitals across the system. And a very acute patient, very difficult to take care of in the environment. But it just reminded us, I think, of the critical importance of the compassion that our staff provide for patients, keeping the patient at the center. Never, ever more important than this past year.
Thank you.
I'll just add briefly, I'm not as good with change, and I think I learned that last year. I would characterize last year as the hardest in my 30-year career. This time last year, it was incredibly painful to see customers not knowing what their business was going to look like, because again, you become friends with your customers, and there's that financial concern, and that weighs on a banker, and it weighed on me. And I was not great at transitioning to work from home. And so it was an opportunity to be introspective and empathetic, realizing that everybody was dealing with this differently. And then the other thing I would say, I fortunately was able to find an outlet for that serving need that I have. If we're not making as many regular business loans, I had the opportunity to work on our PPP program. So M&T implemented the Paycheck Protection Program, as many banks did across the country. And I was part of that team. And that gave me the grounding that I needed over the past year. It was wonderful to be part of that team, because every day there were opportunities to be serving our clients across the entire bank.
So if I could just say one more thing, one of the things we've learned and has been revealed, as I think we all know, is there are health equity concerns that have been really exacerbated by the pandemic. And I think it was revealing and allowed us at UHS to learn even more. You know, even though we have 60 primary care and specialty care offices and communities dotted all across our region, we still have found that access to healthcare and serving communities and underserved communities and doing more in those communities is necessary, and more necessary than ever. We found that in the vaccine effort as well. We've been the Southern Tier hub for the vaccine effort from the New York State Department of Health as our lead. And we are closing in the Southern Tier, by the way, on 300,000 doses, first doses that we've given. I think we're very close as of today. We might hit 300,000 today. It's still not enough. We are seeing vaccine hesitancy, vaccine shyness, and vaccine resistance that is partially rooted in folks not understanding, needing more education, needing a trusted voice or a trusted face to reach out to them. So we have more work to do, but our public health role has become even more important than ever because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Peter, thank you so much for sharing your vulnerability. That's one of my challenges as a leader. I feel like I'm always supposed to be strong. And the last year I found weaknesses in myself that I didn't know I had. So I appreciate you being at your level and sharing that. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to. You're welcome.
Thank you to both of you. I'd like to move just a little bit. You've really articulated that this past year has been, crucial for finding out what those first things were. And we know that they were life and death in terms of COVID and, people's livelihood in terms of, financial issues they've had to face during this pandemic. So before we can really put those first things first, we have to take a few minutes and understand where we spend our time and how we manage our time. And Stephen Covey says that in terms of time, everything can be labeled under urgency and importance. And this 4 squares here is a box that Stephen Covey calls the time management matrix. An activity is important if it carries significant, serious consequences and you personally find it valuable and it's part of your mission. An activity is urgent if you or others feel that it demands immediate attention. So when we graph these two things, these two elements, urgent and important, and their opposites into 4 boxes, we see that most of our activities during the day, during the week can be labeled in one of these 4 quadrants. The best use of our time focuses on quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. important, and those urgent things that we can't avoid. So what would activities look like throughout the day in terms of defining them under urgent and important? Amy, if you want to put up the next slide, I'm going to give the participants some examples. So quadrant 1 is necessity. It is emergencies and crisis, and we can't avoid those. You can see some of the activities. If you have a sick child, you have a project deadline, you've got 10 staff vacancies that have emerged. Those are urgent and important. Quadrant 2 is productivity and balance, preparation and planning. And it's highlighted in yellow because that really is where highly effective, great leaders spend most of their time. It's renewal, it's planning, it's preparation and productivity. In quadrant 3, we're getting below the line here. Quadrant 3 is deception. It's unnecessary distractions, others drama. You can see emails, text calls. And lastly, quadrant 4 is the quadrant of waste. These are the things that are done to excess and suck away your time. So effective people try and identify and eliminate those things that we do in boxes, quadrants number 3 and number 4, and we aim to spend our time above the line. We can't avoid those emergencies, but highly effective people really strive to be in quadrant 2, planning, preparation, productivity, and renewal. So John and Peter, you've touched on this with some of the last questions, but could you tell us as a CEO of a very large organization, in which quadrant do you spend most of your time, the greatest percentage of your week? Let's start with Peter.
Hey, thanks, Mary. I would love to tell everybody that I spend all of my time in quadrant 2, but I think if I'm honest, there's too much time spent in quadrant 1. I think I've done a pretty good job of breaking down what I'll call, so I like to simplify things, right? So the top are the yes quadrants and the bottom are the no quadrants. It's just yes and no. You shouldn't spend time in the bottom quadrants. You should spend your effective time in the top quadrants. And I think I'm pretty good at that. But again, so draw back on last year. So when crisis hits, I think it's more comfortable to sort of go into quadrant 1. That's what I found about myself. I think some of it's ego driven. You feel more important when everything is urgent and you got to get it done. And I'm spending, so I look back, I spent too much time in quadrant 1 last year. And here's an example. I started the year planning and figuring out, okay, I'm going to spend more time in quadrant 2. And just a simple example like these Zoom meetings. Last year, it was a crisis to run a meeting over video. This year, it's an opportunity and it's strategic. And any video meeting I have has as much planning as any in-person meeting used to have. And we're figuring out how to use the technology to make sure that we're driving value in every meeting. And it's pretty cool because you can really drive some pretty good value in sharing documents. And I've come to realize that some of these video meetings will absolutely last because you can handle some issues better in a video meeting. So that's an example. I'm not sure I'll say. So another vulnerability, Catherine. I've spent too much time in quadrant 1, but I'm always focused on spending more time in quadrant 2. And again, I think if we check ourselves, you got to balance that ego and realize it's really better to be in quadrant 2. And just because people think that you're needed urgently is not effective.
Great. That you really articulated nicely, Peter, how all that preparation and planning in quadrant 2 helps us deal with those crises and emergencies that come from quadrant 1 that we can't avoid. So thank you for that.
You're
John?
welcome.
Well, I think there is a gravitational pull towards quadrant 1 that we have to kind of resist. I felt it like Peter all year last year, every single day. Almost every day I was on a conference call or a Zoom call with Kathy Connerton, my counterpart at Lourdes, and Jason Garner, the county executive. almost every single day. And that was very valuable. We built great relationships, some that hadn't even existed before, unfortunately. But there is this gravitational pull, and it's something that I've come to know as the tyranny of the urgent. It is a tyrannical dictator that demands your time, but it can make you less effective. It can exhaust you as well. The discipline and structure that I need to make sure I follow, of thinking about strategic planning and relationship building. Relationship building in quadrant 2, that yellow box, is so important in both of our businesses. Peter and I talk about it all the time in both banking and healthcare. But as we were in our bubbles, or in Peter's case, in his basement, it's hard to build and sustain and develop relationships. But it's incredibly important. And I think we're getting back to it more as we're coming out of our bubbles, as many of us are vaccinated and can take the mask off and have a direct conversation with someone. It's really, really important. Absolutely something we lost that we need to get back this year.
And I would just like to piggyback on what John said. If you spend most of your time in that quadrant 1, what can that lead to? That all day long, 7 days a week, crisis, emergency. John started to articulate that it leads to burnout. Emotionally, you become drained, physically exhausted. And that's why we try and shift and spend more of our time in quadrant 2.
Mary, can I just point out that as an observer, so I highlight John and others in healthcare really led our community through this pandemic crisis, and it couldn't have happened unless they were spending the majority of their time in quadrant 2. I happen to know, because I've been affiliated with UHS for a long time on different boards, how focused they are on strategic planning. And if there wasn't a plan in place, they couldn't have led us through this crisis as well as they did. So they were well prepared, and we as a community benefited.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. But yeah, Mary, you're right. It's exhausting in quadrant 1. It is absolutely just exhausting. And if our focus is too much there, we lose focus on our vision and our aspiration, which, as far as I'm concerned, is what quadrant 2 is all about.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to talk just for a few minutes to our participants, and I'm going to encourage you to draw 4 boxes today. Think back over the last 7 days and see if you can label your activities and put them in the boxes. Ask yourself, what percentage of time did I spend in each of these 4 quadrants? Necessity, productivity, deception, and waste. I'll give you an example. I tend to be an exerciser and a walker. And I would say that that's about, taking care of myself, exercising. I walk about an hour and a half every day, and it's important to me to do that every day. So to our participants, spend a few minutes today and label some of your weekly activities, daily activities, and get that percentage where you're spending your time. I want to talk about box 3 and 4 for a minute, and I'm going to pose a question here to Peter and John. So quadrant 3 tends to be other people's urgencies, and they want to make them your crisis. You know those colleagues who might say to you, do you have a minute? Do you have a minute? And they really want a half hour, an hour. And you know those other people, those reactive people who corner you and just want to complain, whine. So to Peter and John, could you give us some strategies that you use to reduce those things that drain away your productivity and just eat up your productive time? John, you want to go first? That'd be great.
Okay, thank you, Mary. For a long time, I've kept a list of things I want to do every day. and I manage to that list, and that list is driven by strategic issues and relationship issues and aspirational mission issues. And that's what keeps me focused and centered. I start each day by looking at our most important metrics that look at clinical quality, patient safety, patient access, productivity of our providers and employees, and financial success. So I start the day in a disciplined and structured way, and it tends to keep me there. Because there is this, as I said earlier, this gravitational pull to do other things, to have time taken away. And I think the need to make sure that you're delegating some of that stuff to others and have a trusted team around you is incredibly important. But for me, looking at the things that are most important, looking at those metrics of success that are focused on our mission and our vision really helps keep me structured.
Great, thank you. Peter, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, similarly, Mary, knowing what's important and being a list maker. I'm a list maker too, and I love knowing sort of what the strategies are of the day. And I think a lot of times, because once 8 o'clock hits, the day is not necessarily mine, and so it's that time before 8 o'clock can be way more productive. Half an hour before 8 o'clock can be way more productive than the next 3 hours, just because I'm in control at that point. I'll say, I think you need to model courteous behavior. So you mentioned, phone calls and emails, and you think of this priority on taking other people's time. Just popping in someone's office and saying, do you have a minute? Frankly, I don't love that behavior. And I let everybody know that I work with that's fine. You can do that. If you really need me in the moment, you need to tell me you need me in the moment, because people I work with know that it's not uncommon for me to say, I'll be with you in 10 minutes. I've got to finish what I'm working on right now, rather than setting aside whatever my priority was at the time just to deal with their urgent issue. It's okay to take some time to finish your priority and then focus on someone else's issue, because most times it's not urgent. And people learn pretty quickly. If it is urgent, they know I'm going to put I'm going to look up from my keyboard. That is something that I'm personally working on. When that person comes in your office, do look up from your keyboard. I've worked on that. 4 years ago, I wasn't so good at that, but now I think when someone comes in my office, I will make eye contact. And you've got to make that connection. But again, you got to respect each other's priorities.
Mm-hmm. And I'll add to both of those that sometimes we could be better at delegating, and you both have spoken to that need to kind of be in charge and be the lead. Delegating is another strategy. Sometimes it comes down to saying, no, I'm sorry I can't help you now, but I'll send you down to our personnel director and they could help you with this issue. So quadrant 3 really is about those distractions and other people's urgencies. And as you said, that both of you try and stay focused throughout the day.
Mary, we do
yes.
have a question in the chat, so I am going to interrupt. Peyton, if you'd like to unmute yourself, we would love for you to ask the question directly. They're all in a classroom, so we had to get, there he is.
Have you ever felt burnt out over something that you enjoyed doing, but find yourself dreading that certain task or activity? If so, how did you fix that and find that enjoyment again?
Yeah, this format, I can't count the number of Zoom or WebEx meetings I've been on in the last year, and they were really fun and interesting and necessary, and the only way we could communicate for several months. So I have felt a little burned out over these. And if you do 4 or 5 a day, they can be exhausting, by the way. So I've tried to limit myself to something like this that's just really interesting and worthwhile and fun, and just kind of reconnecting with the original purpose of building relationships, focusing on strategy, focusing on mission. So I've said no to a few opportunities on WebEx and Zoom just because it can be so exhausting at times.
Mhm.
Peyton, it's a great question. I'll just add, I think, you got to take time to be introspective also. So I could say that I got burned out on golf last year. I didn't play a lot of golf and I wasn't enjoying it. And it's something I ordinarily do enjoy, but it wasn't because of the golf. It was actually, one opportunity to be socializing with people where we weren't. It was other underlying issues. I was miserable. I felt like if I wasn't miserable, I wasn't doing my job last year. And that was foolish thinking. So I think stepping back and trying to figure, okay, well, why am I not enjoying this activity that I love? My guess is there's probably some other issues that maybe realizing, okay, you gotta let yourself go and take care of yourself first, which it's really important. People don't typically mention that as a principle that they're leading their life, but I think all of us need to be focused on that. You've got to take care of yourself first.
Peter, it didn't seem like you were lacking enjoyment when you took money from me last year. So, yeah, so
I did like
I can
that.
help you with that.
Anyway, did you have more to add, John?
No.
Okay. Patrick has a question in the chat. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask directly?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, Pat Dickerson, Mountaintop Grove, Clam Bakes. So just thinking kind of differently about the 4 quadrants, have you guys thought about like classifying people you meet personally and professionally into those quadrants, where some people have more of a tendency to live their life in quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4, like good or bad to classify people in those. But I think it's a truth that some people tend to be more helter-skelter, wasteful, or productive. If you have done something like that, do you think it's helped you succeed professionally?
I've never done it formally, Patrick, but I think we all do it kind of informally. We know who, frankly, wastes our time, and by the way, we need people who are managing the urgent stuff. We need people every single day who are taking care of those things, and I try and thank them every single day, because particularly in the past year that it's been so important. One of our nurse managers comes to mind, Patrick, so you might know who I'm talking about. Trying to stay away, and as Peter said earlier, occasionally saying no to folks that no, I don't have a minute, even though we always do. But no, it's staying structured, staying disciplined is important. But I've never written any names down on a piece of paper.
Patrick, it's a good question. My only comment would be if the folks work for you, then I think you have a responsibility to coach them to the top boxes, and that's making that impact on people. I try to, if I notice someone on my team is spending too much time in quadrant 3 or 4, then I need to spend more time with them and help them move to quadrant 2.
Right. Great.
All right, one more question, Mary. Malik, would you like to ask your question?
So going back to your top 3 priorities, what style of work do you incorporate into your company that'll put your employees first?
Boy, I think being empathetic is one of the key things. Having an appreciation for their role and responsibility in the company and what they have to deal with to get things done for the customer. I think that's probably the best. And then I'll go back to being that serving leader. So, I mean, I've got a boss, but if I personally feel like all the employees in the southern tier are the people I work for. If something's going on that I can help with, they need to feel comfortable enough to reach out. And I think that should be the case at all levels. I think anyone in a branch ought to know that they can go to their branch manager and get whatever support they need. It's that leading up and knowing that we're all there for each other.
Great. John, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that communication is really incredibly important. And one of the things that by necessity we had to get away from was going out and chatting with people on patient care units or different departments or any of our 60 practice sites across 7 counties. And I'm getting back to that. Our leaders are getting back to that, making rounds, talking to people, listening to them, really engaging them in what's on their mind and what we can do better. So the central theme for me is communication.
Great. Thank you, both of you. I have one last concept that I'd like to share with our participants, Amy. We've just identified where we're spending most of our time, and now we can really talk about how we manage our time. So in order to execute our goals, highly effective people plan weekly, and they use a calendar that integrates both their personal and professional activities. Okay, so planning weekly and using an integrated calendar where we go back to our mission, our goals, our roles, and priorities. So the key is not to prioritize your schedule, but really to schedule your priorities. And I have some tips here for weekly planning. And on slide number 8, you can see that when you're going to begin looking ahead at the week, reflect on your mission statement. I like to take 10 minutes on a Sunday evening and look at what's coming up in the upcoming week. Your calendar should integrate your professional priorities, your responsibilities, as well as your personal ones. Sometimes you have to carry things over from the previous week. And a good question to ask yourself in weekly planning, what's the most important thing I can do in this role this week, in each of my roles, that would have the greatest impact? You just heard John describe getting back and having some of those face-to-face conversations and hello to people, that reestablishing those in-person in times is becoming a priority for him as we're moving out of COVID. So weekly goals are not your typical to-dos, but they represent high leverage activities, important activities. To-do lists should be written down, and they are important also, because we know when something is written down, there's an 80% greater chance it's going to happen. And what was mentioned earlier was taking care of yourself. We haven't gotten to habit 7 yet, but habit 7 is sharpen the saw, and it talks about renewing in 4 areas. So taking care of yourself should be part of your weekly planning. Whether it's a dentist appointment, visiting a nutritionist, setting aside time to read, exercise, relationship building, taking care of yourself should be incorporated into that weekly and daily planning. And lastly, schedule only 65% of your time, because I'm sure Peter and John can attest that those urgent emergencies, crisis will sneak in and fill up the rest of your time. A couple questions to Peter and John. Where did you learn time management? What activities, experiences along the way prepared you for this necessity of weekly and daily planning? And do you have any other tips you'd like to add to my list of planning?
I'll jump in.
Great.
So I learned from my engineering wife. So I've got my first edition copy of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and the owner of that book is my wife, not me. And she started using a Franklin planner, and I adopted it and loved it. So, the whole concept of writing down your tasks and having a well thought out calendar is incredibly important. And then I jumped into the digital calendar pretty early on. The students won't even know what a Palm Pilot is, but that was one of the first digital calendars, a PDA, and it's just incredibly important. I love what you said, Mary, about the integrated calendar. And then I'll just throw out this other concept that for me, sort of these mind pictures, big rocks, small rocks. You gotta schedule your big rocks first. And you've all probably heard before, if you got a bucket, you put a big rock in, you can put lots of small rocks around it. But if you fill your bucket with small rocks, your big rock's not going to fit. And your big rocks are your priorities. And you've got to manage your calendar around the things that are most important to you. So I am absolutely a planner, and people, again, that I work with know you can't just plan. You've got to plan and then know how you're going to execute. But you can't execute effectively unless you've got a plan.
Great. Well said. Thank you, Peter. John, would you like to add to that? Where did you learn time management?
Well, I think learned it early on, high school and college. I played baseball in both high school and college, and needed to balance practice and games and studies, work and chores and all of those things. But now I think it's, and I'm a graduate of Franklin Planner too, by the way. But it's really focusing. And Mary, what you said, writing it down, absolutely. Write down what matters to you, and start with values and priorities, and then tasks flow from there. And if you keep those tasks and activities linked back to values and priorities and aspirations, that will serve you well.
Great. I'm going to throw out a question here and put Peter and John on the spot. Someone asked me this yesterday. Let's say you have a manager or a boss who is always giving you their priorities. How do you deal with that when your supervisor drives your priorities and you might not agree with that? Have you ever had that situation or that experience where a supervisor drove your priorities, and how did you manage that? And what did that teach you going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I've had lots of bosses over the years.
Yeah.
Some of you know them too, right?
Mhm.
And I've always tried to learn from them. And but yeah, sometimes your priorities are driven by others. That is true. It really does have to go back to the relationship, to sharing information, communicating, expressing in the correct, respectful tone, but you have to be assertive about this is important to me also, not in place of, but also. And so sometimes there does need to be a bigger plate that we work from, a platter, sometimes we call it. So you got to find ways to work in what your boss wants plus what you want. And as a boss now, and as a leader of the institution, I'm sensitive to that yeah, there are certain things that I want, that we need, that the institution wants, that our board wants. And that can get in the way of other folks and what they believe the priorities are. But generally speaking, talking that through with a boss who listens and pays attention, that matters.
Great. Peter?
I agree. It's the communication, and oftentimes it feels that if it hasn't effectively been communicated why it's important. But those are, as soon as someone explains why it's important institutionally or to them, or likely it's important to me also, then it's not as hard. It's really moving it from quadrant 3 or 4 up to quadrant 1, and I think that's done through communicating.
Great. Thank you to both of you. I'd like to show one last visual here as we wrap up habit 3, put first things first. In addition to the compass, I'm going to leave you with a pyramid, and this is called a productivity pyramid. And it has its foundation at the very bottom there in habit 1, be proactive in identifying principles that you live by, taking personal responsibility. And to that, we add that what's my legacy? What purpose am I leading my life by? And habit 3, the top 3 pieces of the pyramid, help us put together this personal development, our private victory we call it. So our productivity comes from habit 1, habit 2, and our weekly and daily planning. And in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, those first three really about personal development. Next month on June 4th, we're going to be moving to beginning the public victory, where we talk about how do we work and interact with others. And I would say that John and Peter have really given a wonderful foundation for that. It is about relationships and compassion and empathy and those principles that underlie trusting relationships, whether it's individual or in an organization. So I'd like to thank everyone today. Peter or John, do you have any parting comments for us about put first things first?
It's been a pleasure spending this time. I love that the Chamber's put this program together. I think it's a way that we as a community can help each other. So
Great.
thanks for including me, and it's been a pleasure to be on this panel with John.
Yeah, thank you, Mary, and thank you, Amy. Absolute pleasure. And thank you, Peter, for inviting me a couple of weeks ago to co-present with you. It's been great fun to prepare and to execute this.
Great. Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming. I do want to highlight some of our upcoming CEOs. Mary mentioned our next one in June. We do have Kathy Connerton, who's the president of Lords, and Ben Giordano, who is the founder of Freshie Sites. It's always so fun to kind of pair a corporate CEO with kind of the entrepreneurial types. July, we have Joe Hashey, who's the owner of Synergy Athletics, with Jeff Lake at NBT Bank. And in August, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Harvey Stanger with Binghamton University, as well as Dr. Kevin Drum at SUNY Broome. So it'll be fun to have kind of the two of them. I want to thank everyone for coming today. And I hope we can see you next month.
Great.
Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.